Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
Pleased to have another episode of the Professional Football Researchers Association podcast as part of the Sports History Network. Jon Bozeka and George Bozeka along with you, and tonight we have a very exciting topic to discuss and talk about with a guy that we've had on the show before, and that is Chris Willis, who is the head archivist and producer at NFL Films. We're going to talk about a topic tonight that I don't know that a ton of people know a lot about, but hopefully we're able to embark some more information onto people and bring them a topic here that will be interesting to them. And Chris, thanks for joining the podcast.
Oh, no, thanks for having me on again. I'm happy to do it, and happy to talk about some events, that's coming up or past that's about football history. So thanks.
Absolutely, and I know that a big part of this topic that we're discussing tonight is about Joe Carr. I know you wrote a great book about him just, I believe, a couple of years ago, The Man Who Built the National Football League. And when I think of the guy that built the National Football League, my post-1960 NFL brain always thinks of Pete Rozelle. But after reading some of the key points about Joe Carr, he was much more instrumental than people want to give him credit for, wasn't he, Chris?
Oh, absolutely. I think his names somewhat have gotten, I wouldn't say forgotten, but, not quite as well known as some of those names that are in the Hall of Fame, like, George Halas and Tim Mara, Art Rooney, Burt Bell, some of the pioneers and founders and executives who helped build the league. Well, Joe Carr was the NFL president, from 1921 to 1939. So pretty much the first 2 decades, he replaced Jim Thorpe, who was the first president, who was used mainly for his name because he was the greatest football player. But he wasn't an executive like Joe Carr, who had ran a football team, Columbus Panhandles. But he sort of built the foundation of what the NFL sits on today, with the Constitution and bylaws, rules and regulation, just sort of the standard that the league, knows today. Well, he helped build that, and that helped him be a charter member, of the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1963. So his 2 decades, was very instrumental in helping the league, become a business and become a sort of big time, sport. So I think the name does get forgotten a little bit, but should be up there when you're talking about the pioneers of the 20s and 30s that helped build the sport.
Yeah, Chris, and I know that as a result of your research on Joe Carr, I know just a couple weeks ago on Saturday, September 20th, you took part in a ceremony in Columbus to basically honor the site of the first NFL office, and also honor Joe Carr, and if I pronounce her name right or incorrect, please correct me. The NFL's first secretary and also first female employee, Kathleen Rubidoux. Did I say that right?
Yep, you got it. Rubidoux.
Yeah.
Some people want to say Robidoux, but it's Rubidoux. Yeah.
Got it. Can you tell us about your involvement? Then we'll get into the story of her and additional into Joe Carr. Can you tell us the story behind your involvement in that plaque that's now in basically downtown Columbus, right across from the State House?
Yeah, it was something that I was extremely proud to be a part of. It was somewhat of a goal of mine, going back, a decade or so, of once I realized that the first NFL office building, because Joe Carr was from Columbus, Ohio, he brought the headquarters there in 1921, but they did not have an official address or office building until 1927, and he got a 2-room office up on the 11th floor of 16 East Broad, which was right across the street, like you said, from the State House, in the same corner, of where you had the Ohio Theater, the Neal House. So it was a very popular, prestigious, corner office that in downtown Columbus. And so as I was doing the book, and doing research on Carr, I found more information about the office, and I was like, wow, this is, my hometown. I'm from Columbus, and it was just it's tremendous research to find and to know that building, which was one of the first skyscrapers, so to speak. It was 12 floors, and in Columbus, that it, maybe 7-8 years ago, it was designated as a landmark building. So, so over the years, I was glad it wasn't going to get knocked down and all that stuff. So I've worked with the owner of the building, which at the time, 10 years ago, was the Schottenstein family in Columbus, and they had it vacated. There was nothing. It wasn't being used. They didn't want to do anything with it, and so over the years, there was eventually an owner whose name is Michael Tomko of the Tomko Company. Bought the building and wanted to redo it as its original use, which was an office building with office use, and that's what he did. And so I got to know Michael a little bit. He was encouraged of maybe doing something to honor the NFL and to honor Joe Carr. And a plaque, historical marker plaque was what we were discussing. And but the real nuts and bolts came together when Ryan Vessler, who's from Homage Athletic Apparel, they do T-shirts and they tell stories through their T-shirts, and they just started doing NFL T-shirts. They did the Jason Kelsey show this past year, and Ryan's from Central Ohio too, and he thought this was just the greatest story. Like, wait, the office building is still there? So he actually got in contact with me, and we talked with Michael, and we all three came up, to say, hey, look, Michael wanted to do something like a plaque. Ryan and Homage was going to be the sponsor. They put up the money to pay for it, and then I was trying to recruit the families to sort of be honored, because I was like, okay, the Carr family, and then Kathleen Rubidoux, who was the first woman to work in the NFL. There was only 2 people in that office. It was two rooms on the 11th floor, and that was it for 1920s. Pretty much the first 2 decades was 2 people really working there. So that's what was my involvement. And like I said, this happened at the beginning of this year, so it all sort of snowballed, and then we eventually came up with a date on September 20th, a couple Saturdays ago. We did it during the Ohio State bye week, so that was key in Columbus, Ohio. But it came together, and then we had the families there. We had the mayor, Columbus mayor there, Joe Horgan of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and a couple of the Hall of Fame guys came down and they spoke. So it was a really nice, event that we put together. But it all started at the NFL office building. Like I said, still survives, and it's right there in downtown Columbus.
Chris, how cool was that for you? I mean, you're a Columbus guy, as you said. I mean, I know how much you love Ohio State. I know how much you love the area. What does that mean to you to be able to put that piece of history in a city that means so much to you?
Yeah, I mean, it was. Personally, like I said, it was one of the coolest thing that I've been a part of. I grew up in Columbus. My dad had a used bookstore downtown, so I actually walked past that corner, hundreds and hundreds of times, thousands of times probably. And you catch the bus there, and you just not realize that NFL history is right there. So for the last 30 years, I've worked for the NFL, and so that building became even more important to me and what it represented. So to see a plaque go up, in front of the building, so now anybody that walks by it or goes into that building can read about the history of the NFL office being there, Joe Carr, Kathleen Rubidoux, and her history. So it means a lot. Like I said, it's one of the coolest things that I've been able to do, in doing research, or being with the NFL, sort of to be, and like I said, you sort of knock on wood, hey, that might be there, a long time after I'm gone, that the people will still know, and like you and George, like, we're big NFL fans. We're big football fans. We watch the games, there's a game on tonight. So, like, we watch the games. We're passionate about it. We're passionate about the history. We're passionate about the game now. Like, well, this is where it got started. This is the reason, we have this big payoff of being able to enjoy games, enjoy the history is where this, office started. So that's why it means a lot to me. And like I said, being in my hometown and so being part of that history too, meant a lot to me. So it was very cool to do.
Yeah, and I think too it brings an appreciation, as you sort of mentioned, to Joe Carr, because I remember when I read your book, a few years back, I mean, it seemed like every other page I was saying, wow, because he was such a visionary in terms of laying the foundation for, the modern NFL, in terms of, moving it from a small town league to bigger cities, designing it sort of after Major League Baseball, realizing and sort of being prophetic that, it would be one day, bigger than baseball, that, it would eventually move indoors. There was just so many things that he laid the foundation for. And it's I think it's really great that he's being, remembered in this way, because I think your book was, really amazing in regard to, bringing those kind of things to light about how he, stabilized the league and brought it into the sort of the modern era.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I mentioned, I think he's really underrated, even as a charter member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You just like to, when you hear those accomplishments and I think vision, it was a really key word he said, is like he looked at this stuff and could see it long before anybody else could, like you mentioned, he was talking, and you see articles in the 20s, as early as like the mid 20s to the early 30s about, playing indoors, hey, we're close to going indoors and playing indoor football. I mean, he was there, to help start the NFL draft and, all these issues. I think that you think is all new now. He went through it in the 20s and 30s, stadiums, he wanted to play in state-of-the-art stadiums and like you mentioned, move the game from the small towns, unfortunately, like Akron and Canton, it needed to be like Major League Baseball. You needed to be in the New Yorks and the Chicagos and Detroit, Pittsburgh, Philly, Washington, these big cities, and you needed financially capable owners to run them too. So, which now, like the Mara family and the Rooney family, House family, they all still own the team. So this was 1925 and 1933 in those years. So all the things that he accomplished, he's just second to none. Like I think there's, John mentioned Pete Rozelle. There's certain guys who were perfect for their era, and Joe Carr was perfect for the 20s and 30s. Burke Bell for the 50s and TV, then Rozelle in the 60s, with the AFL, NFL award and the Super Bowl and, Park Avenue, Madison Avenue, and just making it grow, and then, Tagovailoa and now Goodell with, Goodell's main focus of international football or, international games and flag football. Like, so everybody has sort of the point, and Joe Carr had his, those first 2 decades of just setting the rules, the regulations, the foundation, the building blocks, and then the other owners over the time and commissioners did it, in their own way. So that's why his achievements should, like I said, they should be praised because we enjoy it now.
Chris Willis is our guest on the PFRA podcast, as he is the head archivist and producer at NFL Films. And Chris, this story of him, how do you hope that this will maybe influence a generation moving forward of younger people to know more about the game of football?
Well, I mean, that's always, maybe the benefit of certain things like, an historical marker or a plaque, or even a book, or articles or, documentaries, where, they can live on, and for me, like I said, that's why, going through that, ceremony, like it meant a lot because, future generations can look at, like I mentioned, if you walk past that building, you could sit there and read it. If you enter the building, hey, wow, this is, this building that I'm entering was an NFL office at one point, and then I look at that corner in Central Ohio too. It's right across from the State House, so you can have tours. Schools go through the State House. Like, it's easily to just walk them across the street and to be able to look at that plaque and to learn, even if you're, 10 years old or if you're, 50 years old, you could still read that and learn. So that was the key to trying to get that done. Like, this could be something that, people, it's highly visible and people can walk by. And I'll mention one other thing. There's also 2 photos on the plaque. There's a photo of Joe Carr and there's a photo of Kathleen Rubidoux, and that was important too when we were putting it together. Like, because we're a visual society, even more now. With phones and internet and computers, that could grab your attention too. Oh, who are these 2 people? One male, one female, and then you start reading, and it can grab your attention. So yes, I'm hoping future generations, especially younger people, can learn something while they even just wait for the bus there.
Chris, I'm reading your book. I think the story of Kathleen Rubidoux is also sort of compelling and really interesting. I know that she lived in the same neighborhood as Joe Carr, and that's how they sort of knew each other. Can you tell a little bit about her story? Because I think it's really fascinating, because even though she was the first female employee, first secretary, it seemed from reading your book she was more than just your normal secretary.
Oh, absolutely. It was one of the sort of little needles in a haystack that you find. I mean, you guys know when you do research, you never know what you're going to find, and so to be able to find information about her, which going in, like I said, I knew a little bit about Carr, but then you find that, oh, wait, you had a secretary, and this is her name. And like you mentioned, she was, I mean, she has an amazing story just herself, like you said, she was in the Irish neighborhood in Columbus. So Joe Carr kind of knew her, but she was right out of high school, so she was 19 years old when she was first hired, because Carr needed somebody to do a variety of sort of roles, and so he needed somebody to be committed to doing a good job, and so since she was single, I think the other thing that he observed and knew about her was she was sports minded, and I learned that from when I talked to her son Roberts, like, oh yeah, my mom was a tremendous sports fan, and she knew like the rules and regulations. She was a basketball player at St. Joseph's Academy there in Columbus in high school, and so she knew sports, she knew football. So I think that's why Carr hired her. He just didn't say, oh, just give me the first female or that I can have as a. He actually took somebody that could be committed, that knew sports, that liked football, could understand what he was maybe trying to do. Because, like I mentioned, there was only 2 employees in the NFL office. So when Joe Carr was on the road, which he did a lot, for meetings and going to games, he was a baseball executive too. So she had to be there. So she's answering the phone. She's, writing the letter. She's, she did a lot more. She helped with the schedule, players' contracts. And there's one story, that she kind of mentioned in one Columbus Dispatch article, where she would on Sundays actually go into work, late afternoon, sit there, get calls from the game officials and referees who would say, the final score, and she would update the standings and write the scores down. And she would actually walk them down the street, down from the office with their High State Journal and the Columbus Dispatch, and she would give the scores and the updated standings, and they would send it out to the Associated Press, and that would get into some of a lot of newspapers around the country. So and locally. So she was, by far more than just what your maybe typical secretary does at the time. And like I mentioned, when Joe wasn't there, she was in charge, and she would have to talk to George Hallis or Art Rooney, who might have a question and things like that. So so to honor her too, and to bring out more of her story, like I'm even going back now and retracing some of my steps. I've talked to the family, like I want to learn more about her and see, what else, I can find that could sort of preserve her, her history in the NFL and stuff like that. So it was really fun to try to learn more about her.
Does that potentially open up a larger research project, Chris, about women and the game of football?
I mean, there's plenty of stories that haven't been touched. I mean, she's, like I said, she's just one. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't know, like even the simple, who was the first woman to work for the NFL, and you might not know the name. She, I wouldn't say she's quite like Jackie Robinson being the first, but she is somebody that, who was, like I mentioned, 19 years old, who was single. This is what she was accomplishing, and now we would be very impressed by that. But there are, that is one of the initiatives that the NFL is very high on. I mentioned two. If you had to talk to, the league office and the commission, there are three league initiatives that they like right now. And one is the international games, growing the sport, flag football, because it's going to be an Olympic sport, and, the high schools, are picking it up to, the states, and it's women in NFL. I mean, those are the three major initiatives that they would like. So, knowing her history is coming in, and not just her, just some of the other executives, women executives or women roles that have been maybe overlooked, and like, oh wait, who was the first scout, who was the first PR director, or certain things like that. Those stories can be well discovered right now, because some of them haven't been written yet.
Chris, one more question I have, and then I know George does too, but do you think she deserves to be in the Hall of Fame?
Well, that's a tough one. I truly think her story needs to be told a little bit more. And I'm not sure if a bronze bust, did she do enough? I mean, she did work for like 11, 12 years. It wasn't just a 2 or 3 year, situation for her. I have talked to the Hall to get a little bit of her noticed, and the Hall does have an award that they periodically award. It's called the Ralph Hay Pioneer Award. So I think she could fit into that maybe a little bit more than to try to put her up with, because she would be a contributor, so she'd be going up against like Robert Kraft and trying to say, Ralph Hay. So that's a little bit tough to put her in that category. Although, where she's definitely a pioneer. She's almost a definition of being a pioneer. So, but but I would like to see something, and now that, there is a plaque, and talking to Joe Horgan at the Hall, I think they're more aware of what she has done and her story. So there could be some more conversation and more sort of notice of what she did, and maybe down the road we can get something to honor her.
Yeah, her story sort of reminded me a little bit of Eleanor Kane, who wrote the book Pro Football Broadside. That I saw a piece on her on one of the pregame shows a few years ago. She was one of the first females to find their way into the press box, and she talked, her experiences and, dealing with, some bias and some other things, and how she was able to sort of, cut through that. So they're definitely pioneers. Kathleen Rubidu's story sort of reminded me of Eleanor Kane, in, a little different areas, but I was really reminded of that.
Yeah, Eleanor was, like I said, she broke barriers too. So, those type of stories should be, like I said, we should try to, honor them a little bit more, because if they're coming around now, they're going to be elevated. The Caitlin Clarks of the world, and some of these female athletes now that are, changing the game and, changing the perception, of female achievement and things like that. Football, especially the NFL, like I said, it's the number one sport, and it's been around for over 100 years now. Why aren't we honoring, in some way? So, so the Eleanor Kanes and the Amy Trask and, the Kathleen Rubidoux, I think there is a path or an avenue that we can do to try to honor, some of these legacies, because, we do it for their male counterparts for certain things, and let's do it for them, too.
My understanding too is I know Joe Carr died suddenly of a heart attack in 1939, and then obviously Carl Stork then became the next sort of president of the NFL. Operations were in Dayton because he was from Dayton, and then at that point, I guess Kathleen ended up then finally getting married. What was the rest of her story after that? Yeah,
that was one of the sort of amazing part of the story that I didn't cover it in as much in the book. I think I kind of say, oh yeah, she went to work, but I did a little more digging there, and it turned out that she actually, because she was still single at the time, she actually went to Dayton and lived in Dayton for roughly a year and a half, working for Carl Stork as his secretary. So he did move the office to Dayton. He had an office there already because he had run the Dayton Triangles and had worked for General Motors and the Triangle Company. But she went back there. She's in the 1940 census as working as it says secretary, Pro Football League, and she lived and it said where she lived, the Loretto, which was a working woman's, like hotel, so she had a room there. So that was, she did that for a year and a half, and then I think once she would visit Columbus every once in a while. She did meet Norman Knapp, who worked for Coca-Cola and some deliveries, in Columbus. So they met, and she fell in love, and then she ended up getting married, and she became Kathleen Knapp. And so she just raised a family in Columbus. She had two children. One died fairly young, I think around 6, 7, 8 years old. But Robert was her son, so she just sort of became a mom and raised Robert. And then she kind of, once Robert got a little bit older and was able to go out on his own, then she did some more secretarial work for some businesses in Columbus, and then she retired. And so it was, that's the kind of typical, 30s, 40s type of thing. You got married, you stay at home mom, and then you did that. But she did work a little bit afterwards. But she stayed a sports fan. Robert was telling me, she enjoyed watching football and enjoyed sports. So that's what I've been able to find out. Like I said, I've reconnected with the family for the event, so I've gotten to know a little bit more of the extended family, some of the grandchildren. Robert had, I think, 4 kids. So, most of them were there. So we talked a little bit more. And so I'm trying to get a little bit more of their stories too, and to know a little bit more about Kathleen. So that's what I know.
Chris Willis, the head archivist and producer at the NFL Films. Chris, great stuff as always. We always appreciate you joining the podcast. And next time the PFRA has our biannual conference, I'd love for you to do a presentation about Kathleen Rubidoux. I think that would be a really great thing to champion her story. So thanks for telling us about that, and also about Joe Carr and honoring his legacy and her legacy, and your book. If people want to buy your book about Joe Carr and find out more about you, Chris, where can they go?
It's on Amazon. I think it's the easiest way to get it, so there's a hardback version. The paperback version's a little bit cheaper, so I'll plug that, but there is a paperback version of it too, and an ebook version. So, but Amazon's probably the quickest, easiest way to get it.
Hardback versions in this economy, the Guardians won't even spend money on a good player. Not gonna do that. Chris, we always appreciate your time, and we'll talk again soon on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
The Sports History Network, where legends live on and the past plays loud. Welcome to the place where history's proud. From gridiron glory to the hardwood stars, from the racetrack heat to Olympic bars. It's the voices, the stories, the moments you miss, told by fans and pros who live for this. Hook and Themic, the Sports History Network, where the past comes alive. Podcasts and blogs that keep the flame high. From Babe to Brady, Alley to the Dome. If it's history and sports, then this is the home. SportsHistoryNetwork.com, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.